Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into a normal week, one where we win, one where we have regular days, one where we go to Detroit, and we might be favored this week. Luke Jones joins us now in the aftermath of an incredible victory. All of our Wise conversations brought to you by our friends at Wise Markets, and of course, the signature crab cake went in my belly on Sunday. And I'll be honest, Rob Santoni over Wise Markets sent me a text. I was heading down to the press room. He said, maybe it was a lucky crab cake. I don't know. I'll take any lucky anything at this point, Luke, because it certainly felt as though the Ravens, and I use this term out on social media, star-crossed. I don't use star-crossed very often, but when everybody's ripping up an ACL every other day out on your turf and you haven't played a game and you've lost, it feels like a dozen guys on that are injured at this point, two more on Sunday night in the game, that the season was starting to sort of feel like maybe this isn't going to go well. And then the miracle happens on Sunday night and the 4th and 1 happens. And all of a sudden you start thinking, well, it's not a bad looking team altogether, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's a reminder that as long as you have Lamar Jackson, you have a chance. I mean, because you're talking about a transcendent talent. Now, not talking about January and winning the Super Bowl, but I'm talking about navigating a season and winning games. They've won a lot of football games the last couple of years. Since Lamar Jackson took over as starting quarterback, they've won a lot of football games, and he's the biggest reason why. And it's a reminder you have that a chance. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to not feel snake bitten after what's happened over the last month. And we drew the parallels to 2015 and the injuries that they just had an incredible run that year, although that went a little bit deeper into the season before it really started. But I think there's a real tendency to kind of look around and say, is this our year? Is this just going to be one of those years where you look at what happened to San Francisco a year ago, a team that was coming off of a Super Bowl appearance? It happens. You're going to have some seasons where you're going to have a brutal brutal run of injuries, and you just kind of there's an easy tendency to throw your hands up and just say it's not our year. Then you go out there and you take care of business, and okay, there's some good fortune along the way. And I mean, you look at Tyson Williams' fumble and it goes right into the arms of Devin Duvernay, and I mean, there's definitely elements of that game where you could look back really on both sides. So, some weird things happen. I mean, Patrick Mahomes threw an interception in September for the first time in his career. Think about that. I mean,
that's crazy.
Just crazy, right? I mean, and I'm sure he'd be the first to tell you he probably had a few along the way that should have been interceptions over the last few years that he lucked out. But there was a case where he makes a really lousy decision and Tavon Young's in the right place at the right time and picks it off. So it really was, first of all, just a classic, fun, nationally televised primetime game, following up what was a really entertaining game in week 1. Ravens loss notwithstanding, just an entertaining football game. But I mean, just a massive win, as big as it can get in week 2, as I said. I mean, a lot of season to go. These injuries haven't gone away. We'll talk about Ronnie Stanley. We'll talk about the offensive line that did a really nice job. We'll see what happens with Brandon Williams and a strained neck. You're a little uneasy until you see him back and healthy. Deshaun Elliott with a concussion, and I mean, on top of the litany of injuries they already had. So they're operating from a smaller margin for error. But boy, I mean, just a win that completely changes how you feel about the start, about this team, about its ability to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, which we've talked about that for the better part of 3 years now. It opens the door. Not that the door had closed, but it opens it wide for the possibilities of this still being a special year, because you still have Lamar Jackson. And as I tried to remind some people, even though I picked the Chiefs to win on Sunday night, this team still has a lot of really good football players on both sides of the ball. And let's not forget that by solely focusing on the guys that they're missing right now.
All right, so Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be out in Owings Mills all week. All of it brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast, and it'll be real fast before we're in Detroit here this week. But Well, let's stay on our team, not necessarily the Chiefs and Mahomes and the fumble that they had. How about the fumble we forced, right? How about young players? We talk so much about Bateman not being out there. We've talked about using first round picks on wide receivers. Hollywood Brown looked like a first round pick at various points, and one coming into his own, and their relationship with he and Lamar. And Lamar missed all the time with COVID a month ago, and getting timing down, and Hollywood wasn't out there. Sammy Watkins being a part of this is that veteran guy that leads to look a little bit more like a Steve Smith or a Derek Mason and a little less like a Jeremy Maclin, right? Or, at this point, where are these guys going to be? And then there's, Zeitler running out there for the first time in a purple uniform, and then seeing the left tackle situation be not ideal and say, well, Villanueva stunk last week on the right side. He's probably a left tackle, probably a mediocre left tackle, but he's a left tackle at this point because that's what he does. But I think there's all sorts of assessments along the line, including these running backs who weren't on the team 2 weeks ago, and saying, how can these guys fit in? How are they going to understand scheme? How are they not going to run up guards' backs in this offense? I don't know. It wasn't mistake-free football on Sunday night, but they played well enough to win and give themselves a chance to win. And on the Chiefs thing, I'll push back a little bit on the losses. Last year was ugly. The first 2 losses were games they could have, should have, especially the first one, should have won, right? So they weren't as bad as it. Well, the Chiefs are their kryptonite or whatever. I think part of the reason they were the kryptonite was that Lamar felt like he played well enough to beat him at various points and didn't. Now this is, all right, we can beat you. If we have to go out there and play in the 3rd week of January, at least there's some pedigree for that. So of all the things they've done, of all the things they accomplished on Sunday night, for all these young players and Lamar and national TV, it's probably that they're going to see them again here, there, somewhere on the moon. That if they're going to go to a Super Bowl, they're probably going to have to see the Chiefs in January, which they haven't done the last 3 years. But the confidence level to beat them and the fact that they played them so well, we always felt like they played them well, they just didn't win. And here, I don't know if they played them well. They played well enough. They were behind by 11 points most of the night, right? So it wasn't – they got a little lucky. They made a 4th down. They script the fumble. Things happened at the end that converged to make them successful. But I don't know if it was the best game they played against the Chiefs. I probably would give the Jedi game that the first time around.
Possibly. I think for me, it was more so each game was getting progressively worse. You just said it. 2018, they took them to overtime. At that point, Patrick Mahomes was in the midst of an MVP season, but they hadn't won a Super Bowl yet, right? So it was a little bit of a, they were a step or two ahead of where the Ravens were just starting over at that point with a rookie quarterback. But your point's well taken in the sense that, it's not as though they hadn't had some moments, although last year they were never in the game. They got their butts kicked last year. That game wasn't even as close as the final score indicated.
Well, there was a little bit of a threat of that after the first 2 scores on Sunday night. There was a little feeling like, okay, they're going to score 50. How are we going to get to 49, right? And it felt that way most of the night. They had 35 points with 6.5 minutes left to go in the 3rd quarter.
No question about it. But I think when you look at that game in its totality, I think the Ravens – and this is where we need to recognize that we're in 2021 and it's not 1998 anymore. And this is why over the last 3 years, when there's been so much hand wringing over the defense and not getting to Mahomes and Winks blitzing too much, which by the way, he blitzed under 20% of the time on Sunday night. They only were sending 4 or 3 in some instances, and they were dropping into coverage. Now, it also shows that didn't work particularly well for most of the night either. But the overall point is that first quarter was a disaster. You throw a pick 6 on the first drive, and you throw a pick on your 3rd series that took at least a field goal off the board. You look at the empty possessions they had early in that game. Think about it. Interception. Okay, they scored a touchdown on their 2nd drive. Interception, punt. You have first 4 drives of a game against the Kansas City Chiefs, and you go interception, touchdown, interception, punt. You're thinking it's going to be a blowout to the point you just made. But one thing I had talked about with those previous meetings was, I'm not saying the defense played well and they gave up points, and certainly they don't get to Mahomes. And you mentioned the Jedi play, and you think of the Tyreek Hill long pass on fourth down that allowed Kansas City to force overtime in 2018. But the other thing I pointed out, the Ravens had failed to score 30 points in those first three games. You got to score against Kansas City Chiefs. And this is where it's different. This isn't 2000 anymore. The NFL is all about offense now. The rules dictate that. And we see that on a weekly basis with whether it's a roughing the passer call, whether it's some illegal contact that looks like a phantom kind of play. All of the rules are catered towards scoring points in this league. So when you get into a game with the Kansas City Chiefs, you cannot expect it to be a 24-20 game. It's just not how it's going to be more often than not. So while the Ravens certainly did a great job in terms of limiting Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense, their possessions, and you look at the disparity in the time of possession, yeah, I mean, that works perfectly. But at the same time, you got to score points. And the Ravens were able to do that, especially once you got beyond those first four drives where they came away with 2 turnovers, left points on the board, and only 1 touchdown. It really was a case of major danger zone in that period of the game, but they responded. And then their defense got to the end of the third quarter. They cleaned some things up. Wasn't perfect, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that your offense put together an 8-minute touchdown drive in the fourth quarter. Best way to stop Patrick Mahomes is what? Keep the ball out of his hands. I mean, that's just the truth. So it really was a team effort in that way. As kind of corny as that sounds, but it really was. It was very complimentary, and the defense, when they absolutely needed to, they were able to get a couple stops. You can't expect much more than that. I mean, that's just the truth. Yeah, I know Kansas City will have over the course of a full 16-game season, they'll have a couple off games, sure. But I mean, they had an off game on Sunday night, and the Ravens had a lot to do with that, as you mentioned. Owe forcing the fumble and some, the Tavon Young pick and what have you. But they're still going to score a lot of points, so that's why you have to score. I mean, this isn't the kind of game where it's great to say you're going to play keep away, but you better score touchdowns. And when you look at how the Ravens, after those first 4 possessions that I mentioned, that 3 of those were empty, they went touchdown, field goal, touchdown, punt, touchdown, 4th and 1 conversion to end the game. There you go. There you go. And then your defense played a rock solid last 17 minutes to be able to give yourself a chance to win. So very complimentary in that way. And to your point, if this team is going to do something special in January, probably going to see these guys again. And whether it's in Baltimore or Kansas City, now you do have that confidence that, hey, did it back in September. January is not the same thing, but we know we can do it. And they know that they're going to have to score a lot of points. And they were able to do that on Sunday night.
At 35-30, they had a chance with a 2-point conversion to make something happen. They make it, then they get the penalty. There were a lot of things that went wrong. I mean, on Sunday night, including throwing the opening series away for a pick six. It can't begin any worse than that on national television. So digging out of an 11-point hole, digging out of the 2-point conversion they had that felt like a letdown, that felt like it got them back in, to the point where that 4th and 1 decision, they were playing uphill at that point, because at 4th and 1, and the history of football over 100 years without the blackjack book, they would have punted that football. And I think there was even a movement to think, well, traditional football says you punt. They went for it. The analytics part of all the stuff that they've done comes into play when they're making those kinds of decisions, especially when, as constructed, they're not the football team they were 2 weeks ago. I think we would all agree with that. I would have rather seen Gus Edwards out there running around. I would have rather seen J.K. Dobbins running around. Certainly would rather have seen Marcus Peters running around in the secondary, not Brandon Stevens. So for all of – and then Brandon Williams is out, and we know what that – of all the guys over the last 7 or 8 years, when he doesn't play, the other team runs the ball. That's history, right? That's the way it's always been. So when I heard he was out, that gives me a little bit of the yips a little bit with him. But for all the guys out, the thing that Harbaugh has to pitch to these guys the next 6 days is, you're good enough. We're good enough as we are. We don't have to think about Dobbins. We have to think about any of the bad things that have happened here, or worrying about if Ronnie Stanley's coming back. And it's certainly, if I speak hardball-ese, it feels like Ronnie Stanley's not coming back. It didn't feel optimistic to me.
Yeah, it certainly, I mean, I don't know if that means he's gone for the season, but it certainly felt like he's missing some time. I mean, he acknowledged Ronnie Stanley wasn't close to playing, which kind of makes you wonder, okay, well, why'd you list him as questionable? And we know that gamesmanship and how all that goes. But you just said it. I mean, you don't have time to feel sorry for yourselves. I mean, we can all go back and look at some Ravens teams from yesteryear that had some bad injuries. I mean, think of Jamal Lewis going down the first week of training camp in 2001, coming off of a Super Bowl year.
By the way, as much as they hated Elvis around here, not for the music, but for the play, they were in the second round of the playoffs that year. The year where we talk about everything going wrong, they got beaten by a better Pittsburgh team that year, but they were the third or fourth best team in the AFC. I mean, they were decent, and I think we all thought of the Ravens in that 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe Tennessee, Buffalo, Kansas City, wherever they are, Cleveland. Yeah, beating Kansas City with this group changes the confidence level for months around, probably for the whole season around here, because you can always look back, even if you lose to Detroit, and say, well, we beat Kansas City, we're not that bad. We'll figure it out next week because we beat Kansas City. That's a you have a word for that, signature win or something like that, right?
Signature win, but if you lose to the Detroit Lions, I don't know, man. You're giving them a little bit too much of a pass there. The Lions are bad.
Well, then you better say they're 3-1 right now, and Denver doesn't look that bad. Denver doesn't look as bad as we thought they were.
I would say Denver is much more of a challenge than Detroit. But you just mentioned all the playoff teams, but let's look at this. Buffalo, 1-1. Miami, who, Tua gets hurt on Sunday. A lot of people like that roster. He's the big question mark there. They're 1-1. New England is 1-1. Pittsburgh and Cleveland are 1-1. Tennessee, a big comeback for them in Seattle, where Henry goes nuts. But they're 1-1. Indianapolis 0-2. And Kansas City 1-1. So you go down the list of all these teams that were, either the powerhouses last year or teams that were in the playoffs. And they're right there with the Ravens. So, not just the confidence boost of beating the Chiefs, but you look around and you say, no one's running away with this thing. Not that, no one's running away in week 2. I mean, let's be clear, but you're not looking at this as a case of someone's undefeated and looking like a juggernaut. I mean,
we don't think the Chiefs are unbeatable anymore. And maybe we did last week.
Yeah, exactly. Or Buffalo, a lot of people were giving them flowers in the offseason. We saw what Pittsburgh did to them in week 1. So, it's a week-to-week league, and that's so cliche, but it's so true. And we always forget that because I think there's just so much excitement. We spend an extraordinary amount of time in the offseason talking about these 3-hour data points, right? You have, used to be 16, now it's 17 data points to try to figure out what each of these teams really is.
You mentioned the Dolphins. Their data points aren't so good right now.
Yeah, well,
they had a rough week. Well, it's one thing to be 1-1. It's another thing to lose 37-0 home.
Well, and now you're wondering if your quarterback's going to be back. But at the same time, the Ravens, how many people were throwing dirt on the Ravens, even in the third quarter on Sunday night. So it really is a reminder of it's very early. This league is very unpredictable. Who knows? Maybe the Las Vegas Raiders are pretty good. Derek Carr's had a hell of a start to the season. Give him credit. Ravens defense banged up or not, he's put up some points and he's had some yards and made some plays against 2 accomplished defenses. So you never really know. And that's what makes this league fun. If it were the same 6 and now it's 7 teams per conference making the playoffs, if it was the same 7 teams year in and year out, wouldn't be all that fun. You know what it would be like? It'd be like college football, where it's Alabama, Clemson, Ohio. You just go down the list and there's the same. There's a pool of 6 or 7 teams, and that the college football playoff is going to be 4 of those. So you don't get as much variance in that way. So it's a lot of fun. And for the Ravens now, as much as the injuries will continue to be part of this and the challenges, at the same time, if you're the John Harbaugh and the healthy guys on this roster, you don't have time to think about the injuries. You really don't. As much as I kind of poke fun at the next man up thing, because there is a breaking point that you get to, there's that time where you can overcome it. You do have depth at certain positions. I mean, look at Anthony Averett filling in for Marcus Peters. You don't have the same upside, but we've seen Anthony Averett. Well, he's played pretty well the last couple of weeks. He hasn't been the biggest problem with their defense. Let's put it that way. Maybe missing Marcus Peters in a big picture sense has hurt the defense, but it's not as though Averett's been getting his butt kicked out there in coverage. He's held up well. So, you look at those next men up, and now they have 3 running backs. Tyson Williams, looked really good on Sunday night. Murray, is still finding his way. He's a veteran guy. Devontae Freeman only had 2 touches, but he had a 31-yard run. So, we'll see what that happens with those 3. We'll see what happens with Le'Veon Bell, and we haven't mentioned them, but someone like Rashad Bateman will be back at some point, and he's someone who clearly they have high hopes for as a first-round pick if he can be healthy. So, even though they've lost upside with some of these injuries, we talked about that with Dobbins, we talked about that with Marcus Peters on both sides of the ball, but they still have some upside waiting in the wings if Bateman can get healthy. And that's exciting, because what have we talked about? Sunday night's win notwithstanding, there's still that question of, can this team throw the ball when it needs to, when it's forced to? They weren't forced to that much on Sunday night. And we saw Lamar Jackson do his thing, and he ran for over 100 yards. And great. Lamar Jackson's the best to ever do it at that position, running the football. I'll say it already, better than Michael Vick, better than Randall Cunningham. Part of that is this offense is designed for him to do that. Unlike Mike Vick being forced to play in a West Coast offense in Atlanta. So, those questions are still there, but when you get a win like they got on Sunday night, everything feels better, from talking about the injuries to the state of the offensive line to the defense, which has given up a lot of points, a lot of yards statistically, and its rankings are not pretty right now. But hey, they played really good football over the final 17 minutes and got some stops when they needed to, and proved to be a big difference in the game.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on the Twitter thing. He'll be in Owings Mills all week long as the Ravens get ready for the Detroit Lions. On Friday, the Maryland Lottery presents our Maryland Crab Cake Tour. You let yourself play. Let yourself come on out to Greenmount Station. We'll be with Chris up in Carroll County having crab cakes. It's been a long time since I've been up there, and obviously a lot of changes during the COVID era. But if you live up in Hampstead, you know about Greenmount Station. Come on out. We'll be there from Friday from 2 until 5 and hanging out. And then, of course, the game in Detroit, then Denver next week as well. Want to say thanks to our friends at Planet Fitness for supporting us and sponsoring us. Whether you are, you're always judgment-free when you're there. Squeaky clean clubs now. Very, very safe environment to work out. Deal is still the same as it's ever been. $5 down and $10 a month. And I tell you, we get you in there. Planet Fitness, planetfitness.com. You get the black card as well. And they're located everywhere. Get a new location open in Ellicott City as well. Planet Fitness, our long time sponsor. We do appreciate them. You're going to be able to find us all week long out at Baltimore Positive. And Luke will be in Owings Mills for all the coverage. Stay with us out on social media. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, anywhere you are. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore Ravens and Baltimore Positive.